Lumpur Sumedho used to start his retreats in the days of when I was at Chithurst. He has that deep, booming voice. So in the silence of the morning, he'd say, "The past is a memory, the future's unknown, now is the knowing," which was always this encouragement to come back to that basic principle of present moment awareness. So just making that intention is huge. No matter what technique one uses or what's going on emotionally or physically or environmentally, now is the knowing. It's such a simple instruction, yet we always need to remind ourselves of that. So, as I've been saying, how is it now? Well, it's like this. You know it both as feeling, sound, conscious presence. And then just sustaining that knowing of the way things are moment by moment is the challenge. So it's not an achievement, it's more like a remembering. Life is like this now. So, what to reflect on? So in the chanting of the metta chant, humble and not conceited, and then by not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, is not born again into this world. That last line sounds pretty nihilistic, doesn't it? The end, no more, enough of this world, goodbye cruel world. It can have that tone of nihilism in it. But the world in this sense is quite often referred to as the world of your perceptions and conceptions. So say, we live in like let's say the recent report that it was the world's hottest month, right, or year, something. Every year it seems to be that. So that's the conventional world. It's very hot. But then the way we perceive and conceive of that now is very individual for each of us, right? So the climate activists and the other groups and so on, everyone's world is actually different. It's the same temperature maybe, but the inner world of conceiving and perceiving is an individual world. And that's the way the Buddha would talk about the world. So in Buddhism, it's always helpful to remember there's a kind of teaching about conventional reality, and there's a teaching about looking at reality as a flow of events arising and ceasing in awareness or in consciousness or in the knowing. And both are important. So in the conventional, we call it conventional truth, there is the sense of me as a person, as an individual living with my responsibilities and my different karma and my national identity and my literate preferences and my tastes and aesthetics and my history and all of that. So that's individuality, and it's real. It certainly is real. And that's the world on a conventional sense. And then the other way of looking at the world is the arising and ceasing of perceptions and conceptions, coming and going according to conditions. And that's the only time we really use the word anatta. We don't use the word anatta in our conventional sense, because it wouldn't make any sense, like that I'm not Viradhammo when I go to the airport. Good luck. And the guy looks at my passport. Are you Viradhammo? No, I'm not Viradhammo. Okay, yeah, go over there. So it gets totally silly and so on. So if you don't understand that, Buddhism is very, very confusing. So it's not saying that the conventional realm is any lesser. One has to live skillfully in that. And of course that's the realm of morality and social responsibility and political action and reading good books, or whatever you find is a good book. But this other way of looking at the world is also important, because that's where the lines like humble and not conceited begin to be more significant than the words are usually meant in a normal English context. So the word conceit is actually a very broad idea in this way of talking about Buddhism. It's not just the conceit of narcissism or arrogance, but it's the conceit of self-identity. So to say that I am better than you, I am worse than you, or we are equal is still a conceit. It's a conceit I am. Now on a conventional level, say, there are differences of talent and skill and so on. So let's say JC from Singapore makes fabulous spreadsheets, right? So he is better at making, I cannot make a spreadsheet. Big deal, right? So on a conventional level, JC is better than me at making spreadsheets. But on this other level of looking at things, if I take identity with my successes or failures, it's that kind of conceit of self which is problematic and causes suffering. And you can see by holding to fixed views that I am one way and you're, like, let's say just judgment of someone. Your judgment of them might be quite accurate in terms of the worldly dharmas, and you have to be conversant with that judgment. You have to use that judgment. But then to hold it as a viewpoint and then to indulge in aversion or arrogance or so on and so forth is obviously suffering in the world. So humility is more like that aspect of letting go of these endless self-identities, but living in a responsible way. That's very hard to do, isn't it? Because we so like the conceit that I am old. That's a conceit if I hold to it. And how would I hold to it? I say, oh, poor Viradhammo, he's old. Give him more coffee. Or, I'd feel sorry for myself, or I'd whinge, or I'd complain, or I'd think I've got a fabulous body because I'm 73, or whatever it might be. It would still be a form of holding and attachment. Whereas if there is the witnessing of the aging of the body as a function in nature, there's freedom there. And that's going to certainly come up when this body dies. If I hold to the conceit that I am this body, okay, now what? But if you don't hold the conceit that I am this body, and yet, so remember, you always these two levels you're working with. The body needs to be taken care of, but not from vanity or conceit, just because body should be taken care of. The body needs to be clothed and fed and so on, but not from vanity and conceit. And then the conceit is always the sense of identity with this body, these emotions, whatever it might be. And that's where we also, like Attavada and Sakaya Ditti and Bhava, all those ideas that you find in Pali Buddhism are around that limiting who I am to just this like bodily formation or these emotions. Whereas when you come to the sense of witnessing or knowing change, then you see that maybe your real home is not this body. You see that, can't you? You can feel uncomfortable. Like the practicing with sickness is a very important part of liberation. And the idea that I'll never get sick is dumb, right? Or never get old is silly. So then when aging comes and you see people who don't have a reference of awareness and aging comes, then all the self-identities with aging, negative or whatever, come up and they're trapped into those self-identities, and it's tragic. But as this body ages and it gets sick, of course we don't hope that for anyone, but everyone has it, then you just witness like sickness is this way and you have refuge rather than identity. And yet on a conventional level you go to the doctor. It's so important to get those and get those both operating. So then, like humility itself, you could. It's an interesting word, isn't it? Humble and not conceit. It's probably not one that's much. I don't know how much is that word used. Maybe it's considered to be a weak word now. I don't know, but all of us can reflect in different ways on it. But one way to reflect on it is that why should the world fulfill my desires? You know, why should the way the world operates accommodate the way I want it to operate? You know, it's a pretty silly thought when you just take it that way. Why should the world be just? Well, it should be just, because that's right. Or why should the world be this or that? But it's not, it's this way. And then the conceit of desire, you know, that my desires are really what's right in this world, and the world is wrong, is a pretty dumb way to approach things. On a conventional level, yeah, there are expectations. So if I live in a monastery, I have expectations, social expectations of the other community, and they have them of me. And those are the social contracts we have. And if someone does something outside of that contract, we say, no, you can't do that. So that's that level of social. But then at the inner level, if I want everyone to be harmonious all the time and agree with me, then that conceit, by not holding to fixed views, I hold that view and I suffer. So, you know, I do my very best to bring harmony and try to be harmonious. I fail sometimes, I'm successful sometimes, but the most important thing is that I don't hold a fixed view of how it should be. It's this way, it's this way, it's this way, it's this way. And so there's this kind of humility of adaptation and yet responsibility in the conventions that I live by. Both are important. If you just take the one, the kind of flow of consciousness, it's just this way, it's anatta, then you could excuse all kinds of behavior. You know, the killing, well, you know, there's no one there, it's not self. It gets really stupid that way. But if you only have the conventional realm of morality and ethics and social responsibility, if you only have that, that'll never be perfect either, no matter how hard you try. So you need both. You need both to operate together. So in that chant, when it says, by not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one having clarity of vision is not born again into this world, I would see that as born, this whole sense of egotistical birth as thought and as emotion into the world of this experience is not necessary. It's actually freeing not to do that. The other way of thinking about it is about rebirth and those kinds of thoughts. Well, you know, that can sound very nihilistic, can't it? Like, this world sucks and I'm out of here, never again, thank you very much, I've had enough. And that's not a very happy state of mind. Although sometimes we go there, you know, oh God, do I want to be a teenager again? No. So we think in those ways, but I don't think that's another kind of conceit. I am someone who was born and doesn't want to go through this trip again. Maybe there's validity in that, I don't know. But you don't want to have the conceit that I was born. Now that's pretty radical. The body was born, the body will die. But is that my real home? Is that my real identity? Or what am I? Who am I? And then you get to the idea of the Buddha's enlightenment. It's about the unborn. Not the eternal. It's not like a guy called Viradhammo living for eternity. That sounds boring, to say the least. But it's not about the personality and the body and that. It's about what is awareness. What is consciousness, and why is it always there? What's that about? So the reflective mind turns away from the changing experience, not out of rejection, but more out of curiosity. And the reason it goes out into the world of experiences is because desire. I want this, I don't want that. Natural enough, nothing wrong with that. But there comes a time, this sense of being tired of always going out into the objective world and actually turning back and say, what is awareness? What is consciousness? And that's not a question that can be explored through thought, because thought is still an object. And so then you see the necessity of silence for that exploration, the necessity of I would say, intellectual humility, that to realize that you cannot contemplate silence through thought. So if the conceit is in thought and always figuring stuff out, you say, no, that can't be the way. Thought is still an object. Thought is still contingent. Thought is born and dies. It's conditioned. So you begin to let go of thinking, not repress it, because we do that a lot. You get so tired of the thinking mind, you just try to get rid of it. That's not it. It's more like that can't be the avenue. It's a good avenue for solving problems in IT or in home economics or whatever, sure. But in this sense, no. It needs to be known as an object rather than being the driving force of a subject. That's the problem we face. So one of the things that Luang Por Sumedho taught us way back was noticing the cessation of thought, noticing how thought ends. Cessation itself is an important contemplative theme that you find throughout Buddhism, like the end of something, the end of an emotional turmoil, the end of a day, the end of a retreat, the end of thought, the end of self-thought. These are the gaps within which rebirth takes place, the birth of the self, and to have enough acuity, attentiveness to notice a thought ceasing, and then not pick up another object, not go out into the objective experiences of mind, body, and abide as witness. This is a very skillful thing to do. This is the end of thought. But what happens is we are so one of the habits of meditators is to notice that there is thinking and then try to force their attention on a meditation object in order to stop thinking. And then we've never really awoken to the whole feeling of no thought. And so there's a sense of me trying to do something to become something. Whereas if you can create the intention to notice the end of thought, just create that suggestion into the mind constantly. Where's the end of thought? And you can play with that. You can say, I am Viradhammo. And wait. And all you find is consciousness of sense experience, but I am not Viradhammo. And it's actually the same silence, right? I am fabulous. I am an old fuddy-duddy. Fuddy-duddy. Right? It's just thought. And yet, when it's driven by emotion, it can seem very like this is reality. And this kind of fixed view of who I am. What is a fuddy-duddy anyway? So to actually notice, like something very emotionally believable, maybe like that, maybe around guilt or something like that. There was a really interesting exchange that Luang Por Sumedho had with this woman in Hampstead, and this way back, and I was sitting with Luang Por, and this woman phoned up. She said, "Luang Por, I have to speak with you." We didn't have not many people who knew we were in London, so it was kind of, okay, sure. So this lady came and says, I'm a horrible person. And Luang Por said, what have you done? What have you done? And she said, well, my daughter just had a child. Yeah, okay. And she showed me the child when I went to visit her, and I wanted to poke the child's eyes out. and I ran away. And now I'm horrible. And Luang Por said, well, did you do it? And she said, no. So what's the problem? But she had taken the fixed view that she was an eye poker outer granny, not like the grannies we have here, and that she was hell incarnate or the devil incarnate. And that's like whole. I mean, it's an extreme example of that. But she was just mortified by this, and Lompo said, "Well, you didn't do it. You know, it's just some weird thing." Oh. And all of a sudden she could see it. She could see that. Huh? And that's a kind of extreme. So anyway, if you have like some feeling of, some memory comes up and guilt comes up or something, then make it conscious. Maybe say it. Yeah, I'm Jack the Ripper. Or whatever extreme you want. And just know that. Oh, what's that feel like? And you see there is no essence there. It's an emotional feeling driving thought. And that brings you to the end of thought and the end of that kind of selfing, right? The whole self-narrative. So you start to interrupt. You actually use the obsessions of thought to make yourself more mindful. So your mind is caught up with, like, let's say, some kind of guilt, and then you notice this guilt, and then you say it, I am terrible. And then stop. Don't keep going. But you actually stop and then notice, it's like this now. You see, so you use the obsessive thought to propel yourself back into the present moment. Rather than this tendency to always struggle and try to get rid of it and this getting back to the meditation object. And then you become much better at noticing the end of thought. And then as you notice the end of thought, you notice that the personality is a thought. Right? It's the kind of personality view is a thought, and then it ceases. And there's just knowing, there's consciousness, and there's change. And so the reference becomes more and more on the knowing or consciousness or awareness, whatever you want to call it. That, that's always present. So that has to be the gateway to the unconditioned. That must be, right? It can't be any condition out there. So by not holding to fixed views, that, and humility and not conceit, it has a very deep meaning in Buddhist texts and in the existential problems we face as human beings. When you start to feel restless, and then you start to look at the clock and wonder when will the sitting be over, that's the sense of birth of self that we talk about. So you feel uncomfortable, and then there's the desire to get out of the discomfort. Then there's the idea of time. I have to sit for another 20 minutes. Should I go? Should I not go? So the whole sense of self arises as thought. And you can notice that. You can notice that as an object. And you can say something. You say, how much longer do I want to sit? And then stop. So you make conscious the restlessness, if that occurs. So anyway, if you kind of go back to these ideas of the flow of consciousness is in awareness, real life in real time, as I like to say now, and that's the idea of Dhamma, that you see it in your own life. So if I say something which is abstract and you can't see it in your own life, then it's not a truth that edifies you. You might, you may or may not believe it or find it interesting, but it doesn't really edify until it clicks, I would say, in your experience. So conventional thinking could be you're just mulling over one of the lists and you're thinking what that means, so you're just sort of in a kind of speculative intellectual mode, which would be all right, which would be more like the knowledge-based way we have thought and use thought. Well, whereas Dhammavicaya would be much more like, okay, they're talking about resistance. So what does he mean by resistance? So then you take that word and then you just begin to explore resistance, just by saying the word maybe. And then you observe and you observe. So it's a quiet observation stimulated by a suggestion from a teacher or teachings. Yeah, it's not just thinking about it. It's like it's a way of focusing quiet attention on some aspects of your Dharma experience. The classic would be, why do I suffer, right? And if you just went into analysis of, well, I suffer because da-da-da-da-da, that wouldn't be the same experience of like, what is suffering? So the question then makes you conscious. So what's the problem? And then you start to just watch and observe, and then when you get some insight, oh, I don't want that. So the insight comes from the silent attention, and then you begin to say, oh yeah, that's what the teaching was talking about. So that's called Dhammavicaya. But I would encourage, for most of us, less thinking rather than more. Because we do very easily just go into doubting and thinking, doubting and thinking, doubting and thinking. And that's a cycle which is quite common, where you'll ask yourself a question and then answer intellectually, but you won't see that the problem is you keep asking yourself questions. So you create a question which isn't really about your existential experience. It's just like, I wonder what that means. And then, I wonder what rebirth really works like. And then you'll think about it. So you'll make a doubt, you'll create a doubt, and you think, well, the solution is having an answer. And very easily the mind can go from doubt to answer, doubt to answer, doubt to answer, but it's just caught in a loop of thinking. That's not Dhammavicaya, that's thinking. Plain and simple. So be careful of that. And so often the questions that come from folk are you can see they can be very intelligent questions, but they're always just driven by a habit of doubt, and not being able to see that doubt is just a type of mindset. That's all. Once you know it as a mindset, fine. You don't have to go to thought, and that's so important, because otherwise you tend not to be able to get out of the thinking realm, or you give too much credit to thinking sometimes. And yet in the ordinary world, if you have a doubt about a computer program that's not working, you get into it, you solve it, right? So it's not a dismissal of that kind of thinking. But to begin to incline towards the silence of the mind is most skillful to do. And beginning to just, like as I was saying at the start of the retreat, tuning into that silence. Before I go on with that, and then Nisaka, you had another question. You said that the lady where she had this horrible thought of popping the baby's eyes out, and we were just talking about that. Well, we said there's actually nothing evil about that. That thought was neither good nor bad. It was weird. It was totally weird, but there's no reason she should feel guilty about that. But it'd be pretty hard not to, because it just came up. She didn't wake up in the morning and think, oh yeah, let's think that, obviously. So it's not self, it's not her, not who she really is. And Ajahn Sumedho asks her, well, did you do it? Well, of course not. So this the arising of something which seems evil is not your fault. You're not wrong for that. It's just don't do it. Don't go there. Where do these things come from? A bad television show, who knows, right? So the willingness to see that in our experience of memory or whatever, all kinds of bizarre things can come up. We keep sila, but we don't believe that that's who we really are, and so her reaction was natural, but it was really not her fault. It wasn't her fault at all. So that's important in terms of what does compassion really mean? And compassion would mean, or acceptance, is that all this stuff is possible. The most bizarre, cruel thoughts came up, but it's not you. It's not who you are. And I hope it doesn't happen. But you can imagine, maybe she watched some weird movie when she was 13 years old, and that just probably, and then seeing a baby triggered off that memory. Who knows how these things work, just like that. Anyway, so Nishanta, there you go. So tuning, like the idea of tuning in, I don't know if that works for you, but just thinking again about the in language again, if I describe breath meditation as mindfulness of the breath, that's a different indication for me than still knowing with the breath. Maybe those words don't really make any difference for you, but they do for me, because when I say mindfulness of the breath, I tend to be emphasizing the breath. When I say to myself, still knowing with breathing, then I'm emphasizing the still knowing. Yeah? And that's the way I like to train, so that if I establish still knowing, and then I say, well, I'll just ride the end of the out-breath with still knowing. So if I look at still knowing as balance, call that balance, all right? So I get the balance right, and the bicycle is the end of the out-breath. So still knowing all the way to the end of the out-breath. You see, that to me has a different implication, because I'm stressing the still knowing. And then tuning in, like the still knowing, and then tuning in all the way to the end of the out-breath. Now, if that then becomes the language which works for me, then hopefully I could start to try to use that in something more complex, like being annoyed. So then I feel annoyed because someone is doing something which I don't want them to do. And then I say, oh, annoyance is this way. Okay, can I practice still knowing with annoyance? Now, usually where the annoyance is going is to thought. Why don't they stop doing that? Or I shouldn't be like this, whatever it might be. But if you've kind of tried it with the breath, why not try it with an emotion? Okay, so still knowing with annoyance. Annoyance is not still. It's vibratory and it creates pressure and tension. But the knowing, what's that? Where's the knowing within something which is like negative to experience? And to me, that seems a kind of practice which you could do with death, still knowing with the body falling apart, or with sickness, or with beauty. Beauty is very good that way, like an empty sky, like here, like when you look up at night sometimes, the sky is so huge. And the stillness is very obvious. But then you see, well, the sky is pointing to the stillness, rather than me needing the sky to experience stillness. That's the way we usually look at it. You need to touch stillness by going to the lake, go down to the lake. I went yesterday, it's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful lake, big sky. Yeah, okay, great. But maybe that stillness is about your mind, not about the lake. And that's why we love it so much. So where could that still knowing come in the more contracted parts of our lives, the more in-your-face kind of parts of our lives? And obviously, that's more difficult. But it would be a kind of interesting exercise to intend at the dinner table or, other kind of situations, or at the queue in Costco or wherever you are, the still knowing that. Now, you see, that's not becoming an arbitrary catatonic. You're still functioning, you're still doing, but now you're trying to do the doing from a place of awareness, knowing, that kind of thing. So always the stress is on the knowing. And if, it seems to me if you get really conversant with that and do it a lot, then that practice is 24/7. It's not restricted to the object of meditation. So the object hopefully facilitates that. I mean, that's the kind of language I find useful for myself, with awareness, with rather than of. Because sometimes you just sort of, we get, like if we have something negative come up in the mind, we have to work on this now. We have to work on my negativity. And somehow we get so glued into the negativity, right, that we don't let it go. We think we have to fix it or understand it or analyze it. And that can be tremendously important if there are issues of repression and, you know, all kinds of things like that. I'm not dismissing that, but sometimes we can get so into the kind of mood that we just get attached to it from a good intention. Whereas if you can like say, oh, this feels horrible, and where's the, I'm going to practice knowing with horribleness. And that takes a lot of space. Sounds like you can't do it, but actually you can do that if you play around. If you have that mindset, if you have the mindset, I have to sort this out, and I have to analyze this, and I have to understand this, that has its place if you've never understood these things. But for most of us, we kind of understand our neuroses, right? You know, we've seen them, what, 2 million times? So like there's no real need to analyze it anymore. You kind of know, okay, there goes the neurotic Viradhammo, fine. How can I be, you know, knowing with neurotic Viradhammo? Rather than think I've got a problem. It's just neurosis. So I think our culture sometimes over-psychologizes things. And psychology has been a fantastic thing in Western culture, but then I do feel sometimes there's almost a need to always figure stuff out or analyze it. And that, to me, could mean that you're constantly engaged with objects, and you're not coming to the object less. If you see what I mean. So I don't want to dismiss these things, because these are fabulous things, but sometimes we overdo it. Like sometimes I think people think that just to let go is oh, you know, you're repressing it. You have to express it, you know, punch the pillow. You don't have to. Sometimes, yeah, but you don't have to do that. You don't have to follow it. So if it kind of depends on what you trust in. I trust in awareness, working stuff out. So let's just do some meditation. I'll just use the end of the out breath again, just to start things off, and see how that feels. Using sound. So receptive awareness, sound is like this. And there's the still knowing. And notice this, you're not like searching for something, but you know what it is. Sound. Then feeling the breathing of the body. And then the end of the out breath and the still knowing. So establish still knowing, stillness of knowing, and then ride it all the way to the end of the out breath. So that's the balance. Balance right to the end of the out breath. And the end of the out breath is very interesting in terms of physiology of breathing. Sometimes there's a lot of tension in the hands or the shoulders in the in-breath. But now it's the still knowing, right, to the end of the out-breath. So tune in to that. Stay tuned or balanced. Questions that I'll read out. And hopefully I can get some Dhamma talk. So the first A few days ago, you used the image of writing words on paper, saying that the paper's like awareness, always there and available, though the words may change and move around. I found the image very useful to switch from chatter in the mind to white, clear spaciousness. Would you say the words, etc., were in nature in the same way that feeling tired, feeling hungry is? I can see that it's natural that words and thoughts arise, but is there a difference between this and natural physical states? Many distinguish between nature and culture. Anthropologists talk about it a lot. But in this, it seems that culture is just a part of nature. I will think about this sometime, but for now, I'm enjoying the white paper. Thanks. And then the other question, I'd try to combine these. I'm not sure if you received my question. Here it is again. How does one deal with stupidity in the world with moral skillfulness? A quote that speaks to my heart is that all it takes for evil or harm to continue is for good people to do nothing. How do we do something in a skillful way that does not hook our mind into samsara? So how will I combine those two? Okay. The question about thoughts and all of that, as the person is saying, that is in nature. Anything that arises is natural, but it's just conditioned in different ways. So, say the biases and prejudices we might experience as human beings are natural. Their causes and conditions are familial, cultural, and so on and so forth. And they arise because of natural causes. And on the sense of doing good in the world, it's obviously very important that we know how the mind works, and any biases which are closing our hearts, we need to be quite careful with that if culture is promoting hatred and so on and so forth. But I think we're pretty good with that. But the way you can approach that all those frameworks of perception and bias that might be there is simply go to the open heart. And then if you see that, then any biased perceptions you have about yourself, which go into guilt or self-hatred, you just get to know, well, that's closing the heart. Or if it's to another group or another part of society or whatever, that's closing the heart too. So I found if you really work with fear and liberate fear and just very conscious of the heart, then those goodness can manifest in ways that's not blocked by biases and prejudice. But in Buddhism, the world is made up of the 6 senses. And it's not just the 5, it's also the mind, right? So all those structures of perception and so those need to be known. So on the worldly level, we do as much good as possible and little as harm as possible, and we're very careful with those biases. And I had a really interesting one in Ottawa. We needed some sewing machine needles. We do a lot of sewing amongst. We sew our own robes and sometimes heavier canvas and things like that. So we've got a really good juki sewing machine, really fabulous sewing machine. Monks like sewing machines, and we needed some heavy duty needles for the sewing machine. So we went to a shop in Ottawa. And there was a woman with a hijab on, and I started to chat with her, and she was hilarious. She was a really funny woman. And I was surprised. And I said, well, why are you surprised? I said, I thought that anyone who has a hijab must be serious. So I had this bias in my mind, and I didn't know it until it actually came up into consciousness. But because my heart's open, I really enjoyed I enjoy this person. So I think if the heart is open and there are these hidden biases or whatever, you're going to notice it because your most important focus is the person, not the biases, and you'll be able to be with that. I had that insight when I was a layman. I was in Morocco, and I was 21, I was 22, and I had all these ideas that there was a third world, with Martians or something like that. And then I went to Morocco. I said, well, some people are good, some people are rip-offs, some people are happy, some people are depressed. It was just people. And that was a really good insight, very helpful insight. But, I can't talk about outfits because check me out. So, when I go to, when I came to Toronto in 77, there was a lot of hatred, I would say hatred of Hare Krishna, because they had done some pretty seriously wrong things. And I got tarred with the same brush. And so when I walked in the streets around my parents' home near High Park, I get a lot of people opening their windows and saying, "Get a job," or yeah, so some guy spat on us, and it was really quite ugly, right? So that you can see, there's this guy walking around with a brown bed sheet. He must be out of his head, he must be crazy. So all these projected perceptions, and then what had happened to the Hare Krishna and all of that. So people, the perceptions were really, really strong. And Anando and I, he since died, but we would go alms round every day on the streets of Swansea, which is near the Humber River, if you know Toronto. Blur and Jane, anyone? And we didn't expect to get any food, but after a while, we just got really afraid because we knew we'd get abused. And then we were walking out, and we're going to do this every day just to see how this is. And then we walked by a garbage truck, and we kind of braced ourselves for the next insult. Anyway, is that good? Oh, back to the story. So here we go. We're walking along, and the garbage truck is there, right? You with me? And you're kind of bracing for an insult. And these two Italian guys said, good morning, how are you? I thought, thank you. I'm a human being. So I used to get what we call the insect look. People would look at me like I was an insect. But it all changed, it kind of changed, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama became popular. And then one year, he was giving a Kala Chakra initiation in the exhibition grounds by Lakeshore in Toronto. And I went to attend the first 3 days, which were on the Four Noble Truths. That was beautiful, because I love the man. And he invited us, the Theravadins, to come up on stage and do our chanting. He said, Theravad's the oldest, so you guys have to do the chanting first, and then we'll do our chanting. So he's so beautiful, so loving. But anyway, so I was then leaving the grounds, and my mom's place, she was in Toronto then, was about an hour's walk away. And as I was leaving the exhibition grounds, people honked their horns. But now they weren't abusing me, they were going, good on you, mate. And I thought, how nice. Because I felt like I was a pariah in my own hometown, I thought, well, I'm doing something good. Praise and blame, right? Praise and blame. But and I don't, like Lompo Liam is totally free from any biases. It's just brilliant the way he says, and people were just people. But if we have biases, it's not that we have to kind of deconstruct everything. I think just keep the heart open and notice and try not to come from fear, and then things will work out, I think. When Nick Scott and I, we did a journey from Warsaw to St. Petersburg. I think it took 2.5 months, and we flew to Warsaw, and then we just determined to use very local buses and walk. We walked a lot in Latvia and Lithuania, Estonia, and so on. And one of the things we did, we said, well, if we meet anyone weird, we're going to call him Indra or her Indra. And Indra's kind of a trickster in in Hindu mythology that gets up into some pretty naughty things. But we thought, India's coming to test our compassion. So then we get some, because like walking through Latin and Estonia, it was like the back of beyond. It was really interesting. People just had been kind of lost to the Soviet Union, and it was, not cosmopolitan, let's say, but very interesting. And I can speak Latvian. So then some weird person would come up to us, and who am I to talk about weird, right? and they'd start talking, and then Nick and I would look at each other. This is Indra. And then, we'd just be open to the person. We'd be cautious, we'd be streetwise, but we'd just be, it was really fun way of travel. So there, in terms of the question of thought and mind and all that, we need to understand that, as at that level of human interaction and a level of goodness, that we want to do as much good as possible and then as little harm as possible. But how much can you do? Well, that depends on your age, on your resources, on your character, on your vocation. So my vocation was not social work, but I have been able to contribute something to society, which feels okay. So when I was at U of T, it was the 60s, and there was a lot of radical demonstrations and anti-war, anti-Vietnam War, and things like that. But I just found everyone seemed so angry and even violent. I thought, well, I don't want to be a part of that. Not that they all were, right? And so I chose a different vocation. So there's that. There's resources. There's how much you can do. But I think if you're at the minimum, as individuals and human beings, we just, as much as possible, every interaction based on compassion and kindness, that's a lot. That's a lot, I think. That's a whole lot. And then also there has to come a time in life when you're older where that you have to leave that to other people. The more, really proactive engagement. And this is the model in India that when you're younger and you've got lots of energy and time and resources, and you have a character for that, then you can be, proactive in society in those kinds of ways. But in the Indian model and in the Asian model, when you're retired and the kids are gone or that kind of thing, then you really, your mind is preparing for death. And even though you might only be 73, and death might be down the road like tomorrow or 20 years, or tonight, still the picking up the spiritual practices in a serious way, in a serious, a culture needs to recognize that too, and our culture doesn't recognize that. So elderly people quite often, if they have grandkids, that's beautiful. That's very beautiful. But in a Dharma society, these years of mental stability and health, even though the body might be, the knees aren't so good and so on, are very important for spiritual practice. To not engage with confusing issues is a good thing, I think. Someone has to do it, someone has to do it. But where in one's life will one say, well, look, I did that. I did family. I went to the education board, and I went to, I did whatever I had to do. But now maybe it's a different time in my life. Maybe it's a different time. And an elder who is wise and available and has a kind of capacity for compassion and listening and not being caught up is a very valuable being in society. Very valuable. Certainly in Asian society, we see that a lot. In monk society, elder monks get treated really great. I get treated really great. But do consider that, like, what are, if you are retired, and what does retirement mean? Surely it's not just improving your golf score, right? So like taking the quietness of the mind is a serious issue. So then from that question about what anthropologists say about the mind and so on, that's all, it's interesting. Like I'm reading essays by Toni Morrison right now just to get an idea of the cultural biases that come through literature. She's a very good literary critic. and how black people are misrepresented, and that's really edifying for me on that social level. But that to me is more the work of compassion at a societal level. The work of liberation, the spiritual, to me is more the quietness and silence of the mind. So that question about the white of the papers is a very important analogy for me. So I'm always trying to be somewhat socially informed, but not burnt out by all this stuff. No thanks. I want to protect my mind because death is close. And also it's so toxic, right? So how much do I want to pick up? Enough maybe to be informed, but not just to be overstimulated by that. So, and this is natural as you get older. Your inclination is to incline to less excitement, less information, less filling of the mind, more space, more silence. This is very, very natural evolution of human life, isn't it? I think. I mean, who wants to party at 73? Can you imagine going to a pub? God, that would be torture. But when I was younger, it was different. So there's a kind of natural inclination to spiritual life. And we are very fortunate because we are Dhamma practitioners, and we have a path. And we have tools, we have Kalyanamitta, we have literature, we have meditation groups and study groups. And that's really good karma. That's really, really good karma to be able to have that. So to use this opportunity of the aging, if you're materially secure, if you have that good fortune, then to use that in a way of developing Dhamma, and then to be available to society for ways which are wise. Huh? And if no one is listening to you, well, that's okay too, because your refuge now is in the heart. And people ask me about that. How do you deal with the evil of the world? Well, each of us is kind of. I think one way is not to get stressed out by it, right? And how is that going to be helpful? Reading about these issues again is very, very worrisome. But to actually protect the mind and to bring the mind to loving kindness and to stillness, and then seeing maybe in the interactions in the marketplace at Costco's or in the parking lot, maybe that's good enough. That's good enough activity. So I my own life, like in terms of social activism, I thought, well, first of all, I've got to sort my own mind out. How can I have family or be a social activist if I'm still fraught with fear and so on? So I decided to just go to a monastery, do this. But then as situations arose, then there was enough resources in me to share that. So kind of natural evolution. So you have to give yourself time to do the undergraduate work of the heart. Even if you are 50 or 60, there is the undergraduate work of just learning about meditation and understanding your own makeup and what do we mean by transcendence and how can I incline towards that. That's kind of undergraduate work, isn't it? And that in monastic life, we give the junior monks a lot of time for that, to kind of really get their head around how this teaching works and how their own heart works and so on. And they only usually teach after 10 years or something like that. So no answer to that, but my suggestion is less, not more. and if you have gray hair, or even if you have almost gray hair, that you consider that the spiritual life is not a running away from conventional life. It's putting into conventional life wise beings who eventually have some influence in some way. So retreats, these kinds of things are very, very helpful, very, very important, very important. Someone did ask, like, if they could talk with me personally. The monastery is open for business for those of you who have lived nearby. And what we do is we use our, we have a big marquee, and people come and they will offer food, and we'll leave it outside the house, and then I meet with people, or the other senior monks meet with people in the marquee. I don't know what we're going to do when it gets cold, because then we're going to, I don't know if anyone wants to sit in February out in the marquee. It's a bit cold. So anyway, for now, if anyone is in the area and wants to come, just send an email to office and you can come and visit and chat and talk about Dhamma. So we're still in business. Did I answer those two? Is that all right? How do we do something in a skillful way that does not hook our mind into samsara? Yeah, to know your limitations. You might have a grand idea of whatever and just get burnt out. So know your limitations, work local, I suppose. Huh? But at what age do we say, at some point we're all going to be dying. We say, I don't care about politics. I don't care about all that. I care about compassion, about the heart. So why not just do it a bit earlier? Like a few days earlier. Okay. So, have we got any more on that list? If awareness can exist without material, why do we need this body to realize the deathless? Well, you have no choice. You're incarnate in the body and you suffer. And the Buddha says, why do you suffer? And he offers a teaching. So, just the way it is, isn't it? I really like the meditation session in the morning. I plan to sit virtually with a Sangha at the Toronto Zen Center on weekdays from 6 a.m. to 7 when this retreat ends. It is a different tradition, but that is the only group I know that meditate together in the morning, and I feel that it is helpful when I practice with a group. Yeah, I agree. Since it is a different tradition, I hope to get Ajahn's advice on one, whether I should do the 15-minute chanting with the Sangha after the meditation. Oh yeah, just join in the rituals. They're great fun. Whatever, if you're in a church, join in and just try to get the feeling of what the rituals are. Or just watch. You can be an anthropologist. That's what we say to people here. People who are shy of our tradition, they come and you can see like the bowing really freaks them out maybe. Ooh, I'm not going to do that. So we just say to them, just be an anthropologist, just watch. But when you go into someone's spiritual home, like the Zen Center, then you really try to suss out what are their rituals? How do I be polite in this environment? So you're really sensitive. What is politeness here? What is communion in this particular situation? So you have to be very mindful, like where do they put their shoes, or how do they sit, and that. So that's a beautiful thing to do. And there's no ritual prohibition about using different forms of chanting. And the second, whether I should sign up to receive private teachings from Roshi. Well, that's very personal. The relationship with the teacher is very important, and there has to be trust. And so how do you build trust? Well, you interview the teacher. They might not know it, but basically you want to make sure the teacher has a strong moral foundation, very strong, right? No compromises in morality. And you want to explain to them what your practices are, I think. This is what I do, what do you think? And if they're adamantly saying you're completely wrong, then, well, it's your choice, right? But if they are listening to you and saying, oh yeah, you do this, okay, and they're tuning in to what you're talking about, your own practice, and picking up who you are, and then encouraging you in ways which make sense to you, then the teacher's listening. But it's a very strong relationship with the teacher, because you're kind of very vulnerable. You're in a position of power, right? And the teacher has a lot of power. And so first thing is morality, that the morality is like impeccable, just totally impeccable. Because there's been a lot of problems in Western monasticism where beings who are in power have misused that power. But I should think this, usually, I think a lot of that has filtered through in North America now. I think it's a much more gracious time and more mature time. I think maybe 20 years ago people were a bit naive about what a teacher could or couldn't do. As for us in Theravada, we have such strict guidelines around money, around relationships and all that. It's kind of we protect both the laity and the monks. So you have to check that out. But yeah, if you go and you interview the teacher, it's a kind of good way to look at it and find out what values they have. Did you find any more? I'm looking for more questions. Here we go. What do we got? Is it meaningful when I experience visual objects in the mind during meditation? I sometimes see a ball of fire or a ball of energy, and it just comes as I'm sitting, with no emotion or words or clear meaning. Sometimes I experience the faces of teachers too, and that often comes with warmth and a feeling of tranquility and hope. Well, if your project is awareness, and you begin to sense the silence of that, would the light imagery, would that help you? Would that help you? Could you hold that? Could you hold that as an object of calming? Or would it excite you? You get lost in it. So if you get something like that, it's called a nimitta, that's just a sign. You can get fascinated by it and then be fascinated by the object. And then you can even become very tranquil with the object, but your tranquility is dependent on the object. But if you have that object and you use it to just ground yourself in present moment awareness, then when the object isn't there, your awareness should be the same. And it would serve your awareness in ordinary complex life. So where you want to be careful is when you absorb into some object like a light image, and then you're dependent on that, then sometimes you think that awareness is that kind of absorbed meditative experience, like a trance. That's the extreme. But then you still have ordinary life, whereas awareness is not dependent on that. Tranquility can. Like you can get deep states of tranquility dependent on objects, but that's not really what we're interested in. We're interested in this sustained knowing the way things are for long periods of time. So if it's just coming and going, I would say, can you just stay calm and allow it to be what it is and not get caught up into too much thinking about it? If it comes a lot, you can say, what if I just held that in my mind? What would happen? And so you can experiment. But don't create a self around it. Oh, I've got this, or what is that? Don't try not to create doubt around it. Just see, what is it? It's a phenomenon. It has arisen. It is as it is. It might have a calming effect. It might not have a calming effect. But if you get, the project is this the sustained stillness, awareness, composure of the way things are, then you can contemplate it. When the other one, the face of teachers, well, that's very much what I do with my teacher, Lompo Sumedo. I visualize him, imagine him, and then he comes into consciousness, and it's beautiful. It's really lovely, gratitude and warmth. So that's a very skillful way of developing the heart. But then, hopefully, the heart then is more open to the lady of the hijab in the showing shop. or wherever you are, and it's not just about one particular relationship, it's all beings all the time. Yeah, so you know, in meditation, like sometimes people get like this feeling that their body's 10 foot tall. You know, all kinds of things like that. And my question to them is like, are you sustaining composure of mind? Are you getting excited by that? Or then, having experienced something extraordinary, do you spend the next 5 seconds trying to repeat that? And then you're in trouble, because then you're in time. There was the past, I really meditated well that day, now the present moment, and I'm a basket case, I need to get back. And then you have time, you have desire, you have self, and then you have the whipping afterwards when you failed, and all the rest of it, which I think any old meditator has been through. And that's the holding of tranquility as something which I want to repeat. And that's a big stumbling block for people, because tranquility itself of that sort, if it's anicca, dukkha, anatta, it can be very addictive. Beautiful feelings you can get, but then you spend maybe the next half year trying to get back there and don't see desire to get, desire to become, desire, and then you judge your present moment. And, it's pathetic, my meditation. Whereas like Rinpoche said, if your meditation makes you peaceful, then accept it. If your meditation doesn't make you peaceful, then accept it. You see, then when it is tranquil, great, ride it. It's got lots of energy, ride with it, fine. But when it changes, you say, it's supposed to change. And then you say, this is what restlessness feels like. Then you can see how that's the movement to transcendence, isn't it? Which is, so it's not dismissing like deep states of tranquility, but saying, be careful. Be careful. If you hold on to that one side, then the other side's going to plague you. And we're trying to be sideless. New definition of Nibbana. No side. We take no sides. We take no prisoners. So that to me is, like really understanding the project in that way. And then when meditation does have a lot of tranquility, it's very nurturing, it's very energizing, it's very good for you, and it gives you a lot of inspiration, right? But the difficulty is to not hold on to it and not try to get it back again. So that's what they say, whatever happened in meditation, give it up, give it all up. So that's the ideas of sharing merit. Any goodness that came on your meditation, you give it up to everyone all over the world, right? It's hard to do. It's hard to do. But at least you get the spirit of it. You get the spirit of that. So when it is peaceful, you say, oh, thank you. It's gratitude. Oh, thank you. This is lovely. And when it's not, you say, the practice shouldn't change. Awareness is unchanged. You always move to the unchanging rather than to the duality of experience. So Lompa Liam, that reading we had, you read that and you get, I want that. and that will never do it. But he's not doing that, is he? He's not saying I want that. He said, it is as it is. It arose and ceased. And his happiness and now it doesn't arise and cease anymore. And how did he get there? Not by trying to create anything, by not creating and not holding on to anything anymore. Which one? Jeff, okay. A couple of times. So I've mentioned a couple of times the end of the out-breath being an interesting object. I followed this suggestion for the last few sits, and it does indeed seem to be an interesting place to hang out. I'm noticing a lot of stillness there, and conversely, I also noticed a bit of upheaval. It occurred to me that hanging out here is a practice for my final out-breath. I found this thought disturbing at first, but in fairly short order, it seems to be becoming a place of comfort. I'm interested to hear Lompa speak more about the end of the out-breath, if he has anything more to say. Yes, so I found that I contacted a lot of fear there myself over the years, that to me, fear is like such an important human predicament. that to understand it deeply, 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 not at the level of thought or analysis of family situations or whatever you want, but at a deeply felt heart level, in the stomach, in the heart, has been a very, very important for me to understand fear and to liberate it from the conditioned nature of my sense of self. And a lot of that has come about through this capacity to just allow the out-breath just to be what it is, like really just letting it be. And then I have found sometimes like this incredible deep yawning going on. And it really felt down deep in the hara, or just like queasy tensions, wanting to do something, but I've learned not to let it go to thought. And then it has no narrative, but it is fear. It is definitely fear, but it has no narrative, it has no story. It's just conditioning. And in the out breath, which isn't controlled, right? It's letting go. Then I've had lots of opportunities to see it now, like the queasiness, say, or then the yawning and the kind of liberating feeling. And I don't really have to do anything about it, but except let it be, let the out breath be, and then like observing how the in breath can be a kind of a tension, or the hands can be, they're subtle things, they're not gross things, but the hands can be kind of tense, like with the in breath. Oh, what's that about? That's interesting. And so that's why I think I speak about that. But also it's the place where usually, when you notice you're thinking, usually it's in the in breath. So quite often it's also the place where you get kidnapped by thought and plans and so on. So then when you make it a project, the out breath, and you tend to be with the body more, and this inquiry into fear, for me, and maybe not for you, I don't know, but has been very, very interesting and very rewarding. And then, and also then if any bodily component which you pay attention to for 45 minutes, or maybe over 6 days, you imagine how good that's going to be in ordinary life, because you have now got a subconscious movement of attention that you've trained, not inadvertently as it were, but you've done a lot. That's where you go to. So if you're in the marketplace and something's happening, some of your attention is going to go here because you've been doing it. It'll go to the out breath because you've been doing it. And that's fabulous, because then you have a way of like processing things which are triggered by complexities that you might not see on a retreat, but you've done the work where attention is no longer just in thought or the personal relationship. It's deeper in your own system. So I find it a kind of, like you say, a nice place to hang out. And then also it's very calming. You really get a lot of composure and you kind of relax into that. So it's a very lovely space to be in. and the mind likes that, and there's a kind of sense of peacefulness, but it's not trance. You're not absorbed into it. You're fully open and awake and with life as it presents itself. Yeah? Get another one? How do I reach out to someone who I see as my teacher and hope I might be received as their student? Well, basically in Theravada, it's like the senior monks are teachers for anyone who wants to come, and we don't set up personal relationships. But having said that, if you come to a monastery and you find one of the senior monks are helpful, then if you talk with them and they get a sense of your story and the kinds of things that you are learning about, then from then on you have established a relationship. The monk knows, oh yeah, okay, yeah, and you don't have to kind of repeat your story every time. And it's a very natural thing in monasteries. The monk's duty is to always be available to the laity. That's our duty. That's the abbot's first duty, really, is to be available to the laity whenever they come, hopefully not at 2 a.m. But because our we do have a kind of brief to serve society in this particular way, and so I know obviously I know lots of people, and they come and I talk about their practice and I get to know them. They're very good friends, but there isn't a kind of guru-chela relationship that you might find in, I think, Tibetan Buddhism has more of that, where it's sort of more directed maybe. Usually Theravada teachers don't give much direction in terms of like what you should do with your life. We usually back off on that. So it's more like conversing about Dharma and then bringing up the like any problems a layperson comes to in the monastery. We're not therapists. We're not skilled in that. So always we're trying to take it, well, okay, but what's the Dharma here? So if there's some, marriage contract which is falling apart or something, so basically a marriage counselor for that one. They're more skilled than we are. We're not really skilled in that, and we aren't. We just don't have. Or if someone has like deep psychoses or things like that, we said, no, we don't have the expertise for that. You have to see a specialist for that. So someone came to me with like PTSD or something, I said, no, you need someone who's really good at that, really professional, right? And we have, like I have maybe a few names that I could send people to and so on. So the relationship with the monk is just more like Dharma, and then trying to, the human problems a person has, well, okay, how can we look at greed, hatred, and delusion in here, the Four Noble Truths with that, rather than like solving the problem on a pragmatic level. And so that's why like the word Lompo is like the granddad who's just like hanging around the monastery chewing betel nut, and then when people want to come, he's available. And so we're very fortunate. We have 3 senior monks here. All of us like to talk Dhamma and teach. So that's the way that Theravada works that way. It's very nice that way. So you don't have to kind of establish a guru-chela relationship in that way. Not. Thank you for the knowing of breathing. Thank you for the teaching today on knowing of breathing. I found this very helpful to let the mind to rest in the knowing rather than the object of breathing. Would a parallel be awareness of space in vision or awareness of silence around sound? If all these practices have the effect of stopping the mind and opening the heart to silence and a deep tenderness. Yes, Adhu. Yes, definitely. Can you show me that again, please? Awareness of space. Yes, that's very much it's an intuitive one, isn't it? Awareness of silence around sound. Yes, that's it. So then sadhu. So space is an interesting one, isn't it? Because we don't tend to. That's a common analogy. It's like I said, the print on the book and the page of the book. That's what the space analogies are about. And you'll find teachers are always saying, like this room has objects. There's a Buddha Rupa, there's people, there's color, there's sound, there's texture, and there's space. Now, how do you notice the space? It's there. You have to take your attention away from objects. And that's the idea. When you take your attention away from objects, then you begin to see, consciousness, awareness, space. You see, it's kind of one piece, isn't it? And then from that, you can understand why the craving for objects is the wrong place to look. If you're hungry and you haven't eaten, an object would be nice. A sandwich would be very nice, thank you. But this is different. So that's why the abandonment of the strategies of craving is very important for realizing the unconditioned. And space is like that. Like space is a sort of, you know, it's intuitive. But if you just do that, and then is the space here different than out there? So you go there, and oh, it's the same space. You get a sense of awareness, space, knowing. You kind of get an intuition of what all that language is talking about. And these are you know, these are really interesting parts of our spiritual life, which we touch more and more. You know, we sort out the emotional stuff that we all have, and you know, we kind of get past that, and our fears and social, you know, social consciousness or whatever it might be, and we begin to, you know, the mind begins to quiet down, and you know, as it quiets down, it doesn't really like excitement anymore, does it? And so that question about as you age, what to do, go for the simplicity rather than complexity. That's very, very natural. And what could be more simple than space and awareness itself? Very simple. Now, for the mind which is intoxicated with objects, you can't teach that. You have to teach morality. Morality and like slow down, sobriety. Okay, yeah. But as you begin, you know, as your attention is more refined, even the doing of meditation objects becomes too coarse, doesn't it? Don't you find that? You know, the holding of an object, you start to, I've done that. I can relax away from that. I can go and notice space. And this isn't being spaced out either. You're very, very, very conscious, and you sort of, yeah. And you learn, and that's where you get now the ideas of choiceless awareness. And you're still choosing to be present, but you kind of open out away from objects. But then if you know how to do both, and you're getting kind of confused, yeah, you ground yourself on the breath, the out breath. Yeah, I can do that. I can compose and collect. But then then you question the whole sense of doing so much, and then you open out. They're lovely things, aren't they? They're really lovely. Okay. During meditation, I seem to give instructions or reminders to myself. I am aware, let go, I am grateful. Thus, I'm always talking to myself. Is this okay to do throughout meditation? Yes and no. You know, like the first teacher, Venerable Jnanasuchi, said, what's the word the Buddha would have used the most? It depends. It's true, isn't it? You can't, it's not like a yes, no. So it kind of depends on the makeup of your mind. If you're an obsessive commenter, like you're always making commentary, then no, probably not so good. But if you know how to coach yourself with language, like a suggestion, that's great. So it sort of depends on habit and the result. But you do want to go and taste the silence, don't you? The silence of no thought. So if it's a kind of machine gun of comments, it'd say, a little bit much. But if you say, grateful, and that eases your heart, and you abide as gratitude for love, great. That's a really good use. Right thinking, using it correctly. Or you just say, relax, nowhere to go, nothing to do. Or wake up, fine. But it's not just verbiage all the time. So you want to taste the silence of the mind and have an aptitude toward that, have a tuning in towards that, have a familiarity with that, confident in that, have faith in that kind of stuff.